anodizing, right, a chemical process to control oxidization. Rust bluing, to loop back to firearms here, is often not referred to as rust bluing. It's just referred to as bluing.
Right, because if you say rust in it, people think it's bad.
What is up, everybody? Mark on the mic here. Jim to my right. Across from us, our esteemed colleague, the Ryan Muckenhern. Jim, a while ago, Ryan and I...
Yeah, I'm upset.
You were upset.
No, I don't say I was. I am.
You're still upset.
Yes.
Which is why we're here today to talk about your feelings.
Present tense.
Your feelings on Rust, because this is the podcast in question where Ryan and I did...
Why? Why did you do it without me?
We kind of did a Surface Rust on Firearms podcast behind your back.
I know. Rust is my least favorite thing in the world. I hate rust more than, I don't know, name anything that everybody has hated in the last 2 years. I'll tell you I hate rust more than all that.
Taxes.
Yeah, I hate rust more than taxes.
Oh, man.
You can avoid taxes. It's hard to avoid rust.
Jim, that's called tax evasion. Avoiding taxes is that's against the law.
Yeah, well...
And you hate rust more than that.
Absolutely.
Jim would go to jail first versus experience rust at any level.
If he was there long enough, that rust would rot the bars and Jim could narrowly escape.
Yeah, I'd still hate it. I wouldn't escape.
Because you'd get it on your hands.
No, I wouldn't. If honestly, if I was in jail and rust made the bars deteriorate before my very eyes, I wouldn't escape just because it was because of rust. That's how much I hate. I'd be like, you know what? No, Rust, you tried to do me a favor? No, screw you.
You'd point it out to the guards before it got some. You'd be like, hey, can somebody do something about this rust?
Seriously. I don't want to be near it.
Be in jail for tax evasion for the rest of your life. Or at least I don't know how long you go into jail for that.
God, Mark's segue, though, that was top 3. We're here to talk about your feelings about rust.
That was good.
That was off the cuff. So speaking of rust, Jim.
Yeah.
So like I said, we talked about surface rust on firearms. So if you're interested in that, audience, take a look back. Ryan talks all about kind of what's going on there, how we can prevent it. Jim, there's a greater topic here. Rust doesn't just affect firearms.
Well, it affects all kinds of things.
It affects metal. Should we define what rust is? I think people have a general sense, but...
It's a chemical reaction that happens to metal. It happens to many metals, but in the case of anything that's made out of steel, or basically iron alloys, it happens in a different way than it happens to many other kinds of metals that we know, like aluminum or copper or other things like that basically also oxidize, but their oxidization actually protects themselves. Whereas, steel here, when it rusts, it's very self-destructive.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I printed off a definition here. You know how I like to do that, Jim.
I know you do like to do that.
It says rust is an iron oxide, usually a reddish brown, formed by the reaction of iron and oxygen in the catalytic presence of water or air moisture.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. It involves electrons and all kinds of very interesting things. Atoms, it gets all the way down to the molecular and atomic level.
What you were talking about, how it affects steel differently.
Right.
What's going on there? You have a visual aid too.
Yeah, we have a visual aid. This is actually thanks to our dear friend Jay, who is actually local, and we won't say what Jay does exactly. Because he just requested that because some of what he does, he's not an FFL, and so he can't sort of modify firearms. And therefore, based on what he does, some people hit him up, and then he has to unfortunately say, hey, sorry, guys.
It's not that he's doing anything wrong. He doesn't want to have to say no.
No, yeah, exactly. So he's more like, I'd rather just avoid the questions coming in. So, but I totally get it. And Jay's a really cool guy, though, and he helped us out with kind of our visual aid here. But, yeah, like you said, steel and kind of related, iron alloys and stuff like that, they all kind of rust in the same way, and it's a different way than those other metals like I mentioned before. I mean, copper and aluminum are two very I think, very distinct ones that everybody sort of knows. Like if you've ever seen copper with that nice patina it gets that people actually like, a lot of times, that greenish color, that is essentially kind of like rust. But I think there's like the technical definition of rust, and then there's also like people's thoughts about what rust is. So
yeah, it says, many other metals undergo similar corrosion, but the resulting oxides are not commonly called rust. So that's why you're getting into that like patina type thing on brass or something like that.
Yeah, but when you get that patinas, or when you get an aluminum oxide layer on aluminum, it's a layer of oxidization on the outside of the metal that's bonding to the metal, the base metal, and then it's actually protecting it from further oxidization. And so that's really cool. That's why when you make stuff out of aluminum, it doesn't rust in the sense that things start flaking off and falling off and creating holes and looking tremendously ugly. It doesn't do that. So when you have steel, that's where you start having the formation of this oxidization layer, but the oxide or the oxidization, it doesn't adhere to the base metal. It actually flakes away. So then that's where when you look at the, frame of an early 2000s Toyota Tacoma, and it's flaking away and becoming progressively thinner and thinner, and big chunks of it that almost kind of look like big red metal flaky holy cakes just start falling off right there near where the bed and the cab meet up and all that good stuff. That's it essentially falling away. And then it exposes new bare metal underneath, which then begins to undergo the same process. It just gets thinner and thinner until it's gone, and you see pictures of Tacomas on the internet that are split in half.
Nobody likes that, Jim. And I think, up until this point, people might be going, what the hell are these guys talking about rust for? Well, this is a hunting podcast. This is a shooting podcast. This is a variety podcast. But a lot of the activities that we partake in, we use our vehicle to get there. You want that vehicle functioning optimally and looking good as well, Jim.
That's right.
That's why we need to know about what rust is.
Yeah. I mean, I won't...
what it's doing, and how do we prevent it?
Yeah, I won't claim to be a rust expert. Like, I'm not a metallurgist or a scientist, but I have been fighting rust as long as I have been in, like, related...
Lifelong battle against
related
rust.
hobbies. So, obviously, I'm a big car guy, so I've been fighting rust in terms of on my vehicles for a long time, and I feel like I've settled on some pretty good rust prevention techniques. I do drive a 93 Dodge Ram pickup, which is very notorious rust bucket in many areas. I've managed to keep rust off of it despite driving through 2 Wisconsin winters here in the Rust Belt. It still looks pristine.
Is that something you made up, or is that a thing?
No, that's a term.
We're in the Rust Belt.
We're in the Rust Belt.
Yeah.
It's this whole strip of the country that kind of is in, winterous climates, that also wherever they use salt on the roads. Or other harsh chemicals.
Do you know, Jim, why the salt is a catalyst for rust?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of research on that, and the thing is that you can't have rust, and we're kind of like, we'll stick to the steel and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Things that your car is made out of your frame, unless you have a new F-150 or, some of these other fancy cars, some Land Rovers and things like that are aluminum bodies and things. But, so steel, that is, what was I going to say? Oh, you have to have water. There has to be moisture.
Okay.
For rust to exist.
Right.
Some people, I think that it is the salt which makes the car rust, and that's not necessarily true, although that definitely does accelerate the rust. Yeah. So that salt or other chemicals can cause electrons to move more freely than if it were just regular, straight up fresh water that was on the steel. And when those electrons can move more freely, it just accelerates the process, like Ryan said. Ryan, you have done lots of metal things in your life, more even so than me. And so, what do you know about this whole process?
So what you talked about, oxidization. So we call rust, and we think it's the red thing. Oxidization is the encompassing term, right? But everything that you hit on, the chemical process occurring at the surface level of the metal, accelerated by water and a saline solution or salt or something like that. Is it like reverse electrolysis? Is that a way to put it? Or electrolysis?
I'm not super good at electrolysis.
Okay. Just accelerating the degrade.
As in, I would have to look up what that.
Oh,
word
okay.
is. I'm sure once I looked it up, I'd be like, oh yeah. That's
So like if you
but-
took water and it had a high enough salinity, and you put a piece of iron in there,
yes,
any ferrous metal, and then you hooked it up to like a battery and ran, like you'd hyper accelerate it.
Yeah.
That's that free movement of all that going on there, and then bam, you just have this massive oxidization. I think you can actually reverse it as well, or at least at the surface level with that. But we see the brown red crud as rust. This is what our firearms do. This is what the frames on those early Tacomas. Mine doesn't have that. I don't think. I hope. God, you scared me when you said that.
This is a late model Tacoma.
Yeah, everything's fine.
Could be related, but electrolysis, what's coming up here is related to laser hair removal.
Thank you for that, Mark.
We'll dive a little bit deeper.
So I didn't work as much with steel at the last place. I worked with aluminum. And
We're getting to where you were talking about, Ryan.
Right.
You're through
You
the
were
hair
just through
removal
the
ads.
ads.
Yeah,
You did the ads.
you're
That's
through
what
the
we
Groupon
have there.
ads of laser hair
Mark's
removal.
been looking that up a lot. That's
Do you
why
want
Google's
what I
serving
came
it
up with here? Well,
Yeah,
I'm gonna,
sure,
and then
Mark.
hold that thought,
Love,
okay?
I love what you got.
This is from the Wikipedia. In chemistry and manufacturing, electrolysis is a technique that uses direct electric current to drive an otherwise non-spontaneous chemical reaction. Electrolysis
Very nice.
is commercially important as a stage in the separation of elements from naturally occurring sources as ores.
Thank you.
Neat.
There. That's how far I'm going to go with
I
that.
still don't know if I was right in saying that. But
Yeah.
so we worked with aluminum at the last outfit that I worked at. A lot of aluminum parts, think like AR-15s and things like this. And we fought aluminum oxide quite a bit. Not that it's a bad thing. Like you said, it's like a candy shell that's on the outside of the aluminum in raw form once cut. And once that oxidization occurs, it's easy to remove. But what's crazy about aluminum oxide compared to iron oxide or rust, as we refer to it as, is how abrasive and hard it is.
Yeah.
And how ridiculously fast it can destroy your tooling that you're using to cut stuff with and abrade other metals and like shred them. And even metals that are harder than aluminum is in its base form. So like aluminum v steel, introduce aluminum oxide to this, and now you've got this like crazy abrasive compound. And actually a lot of media blasted stuff, sometimes it's sand that they use to blast rust off, and sometimes they use aluminum oxide, and that'll shred that right off of there very aggressively, which is fun and crazy. That's about all I know about rust, Jim. From that standpoint.
I do know in that case too, like if you're welding aluminum, it's kind of tricky because you got to bust through that oxide layer.
Yeah, the
And
slag.
And then all of a sudden now you're down to the base metal. You got to like chill out a little bit.
Yeah.
Before you start burning holes, but
So you're
aluminum,
kind of going full throttle, and you got to back her off a little bit.
a little bit, yeah.
but aluminum doesn't rust like in this characteristic way. That's part of the iron component to
Well,
it.
and sometimes too, when it comes to the aluminum, you can use that oxidization process to your advantage, because that's what I've gathered. Anodizing is it's like a dyed accelerated oxidation, and then other time, like I know what our friend Jay has described doing in the past is sometimes with aluminum parts, you can add essentially a product to the aluminum to accelerate the oxidation process to kind of get that protective layer, but then also inhibit further oxidation from happening. Because sometimes oxidation, like you'll also see it, for example, on silver. They call it tarnishing instead of rusting.
Okay.
And so then it can look a bit ugly if that's not the look that you want to go for. Like if you want to have something that's nice and shiny and brilliant, then that can cause an issue.
You're going to need silver polish then to get that back.
Flits.
Flits, you say?
Yeah, it's good polish.
Okay.
All metals.
Yeah.
I had a really good thought and I just lost it. I was thinking about
You're talking about our visual. You're pointing at our visual aid.
Well, I was thinking about iron oxide and aluminum oxide and anodizing, controlled processes. That's what I was thinking of.
Oh yeah.
So anodizing, right, a chemical process to control oxidization. Rust bluing, to loop back to firearms here, is often not referred to as rust bluing. It's just referred to as bluing.
Right, because if you say rust in it, people think it's bad.
Yeah, super scared, right? But if you think of like a high polished blue rifle barrel or receiver any metal component on there. That's actually just a controlled rusting or oxidization process in which it then becomes a protective layer over the top of the metal.
Yeah.
And
So we have here sort of on our visual aid, it's
Conversion.
just not bluing.
yeah. So in doing so, you achieve a very like consistent and attractive coating on the top there that actually acts as a rust preventative to a certain degree, although it is in essence oxidization, which is crazy.
Right.
Because it's not flaking away. It's protecting.
No. Yeah.
No, but yeah, in that case, they've essentially and I was actually just reading about this before we started because I knew we were going to talk probably about bluing, and then I've blew it. Get it? But in that case, it's a controlled form, and it actually creates a protective barrier. That's really that's what it all comes down to. When it comes to metals, oxidize. If you want it to oxidize, in the case like we said, like with coppers or something like that, then you just let it happen, and it is what it is. It'll protect itself over time. It may just not have the look. If somebody wants to keep that brilliant, shiny coppery look, then you're going to want to protect against that. But otherwise, if you don't care, then whatever. In the case of steel and other, very similar metals like that, then you are going to want to protect it because otherwise then it will start to become a structural issue or a functioning issue or something like that. And so, that's the biggest thing is you need to know what ways you can basically protect it. And the biggest ways that you can protect it is finding various solutions. Solutions is also like a word for, like some sort of solution, a mix of stuff. I'm not referring to that, but finding various solutions that prevent moisture from getting to it.
And most of them all are going to be a physical barrier or a chemical barrier, physical or chemical barrier.
Right.
Jim, before we get into some of those solutions, can you speak to...
A word from our sponsors. That's what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah, we have sponsors now, Jim.
Yeah.
No, but like speak to some of the things on your auto that a person, areas that you'd want to protect commonly affected by rust. Like I think the body is like, that's an easy one. You're like, oh yeah, that thing's a rust bucket. Oh, the wheel wells are rusted out on that thing. But like you dive underneath the car, there's a lot more going on that could potentially be affected by rust. Like take a leaf spring, a leaf spring. Like our friend Eric had one that came off while he was driving one day.
Yeah, well, I doubt that. So I doubt that had to do with this whole leaf spring rusting through. That's kind of one of the interesting things, and that has to do with all the different parts that you have underneath. In the case of your car, and actually a lot of times any mechanical item that's made up of a number of different parts, usually you're going to have different alloys and types of metals that are all going together. So a lot of times what you'll see, the metal or the alloys that they use for like springs or leaf springs, coil springs, they'll develop that rust. They can get red, rusty, maybe flake off the paint that they had on them. But it takes a really, really, really long time before those kinds of alloys get like structurally wrong.
Gotcha. So that would be more of a cosmetic thing.
For the most part. And I don't know if it just has to do with usually the thickness of those metals and that there's a lot to get through before it becomes a problem. And usually the metal that's like making up the body of your car isn't so much. But you see frames of cars rust out well before things like the leaf springs do a lot of times, which is kind of interesting. So, I'd have to venture to guess there's something in the alloy that they're using that makes it more springy that helps with some of the I guess corrosion over time. But I guess, for cars, it's always things, you just mentioned the wheel wells. Everybody always points out the wheel wells because the wheel wells rust like crazy. And usually on a lot of cars, usually that's because they provide, your wheels and your tires are right there kicking up all kinds of water and dirt and other, salt, whatever it is that you drive over. And then there's a lot of nooks and crannies in there that stuff can get stuck in. And if it's not able to especially dry out, then you're going to have moisture trapped in there, and then that's where the rust is going to start. If it's untreated metal, not treated by primer and paint or some other type of coating, then that's just going to happen like lickety-split. If it is painted, then you're kind of a ticking time bomb there if you do have some of those little pockets, because that's where the dirt and gravel and salt will eventually kind of etch away at the paint and, whatever other coating is there, and it starts to become unprotected. That actually happens a lot of times too with other metals. If their oxidization layer is sort of scratched away, mechanically removed somehow, they will begin to make a new oxidized layer. And so that's the thing. Anytime your protective layer is removed, you're going to start to get the oxidization when moisture is introduced to the base metal. So yeah, wheel wells, cross members, if you get underneath your car, like the cross members that are holding up the motor or the transmission or, other things like that, those tend to, it depends on the vehicle, but some of them are just made of aluminum, so you don't even have to worry about it. But ones that are made out of steel, like I know I've got an old Beamer wagon, and those cross members are, I swear they're made out of like pot metal, because I had them coated, I had them everything, but they're in a spot where they're going to get nicked by debris. And then the makeup of that metal is just, it likes to get rusty and flaky pretty darn quick. I don't know. It varies so much car to car. Exhaust components, those are pretty classic. They'll rust out, especially the hangers or various things that are holding them up. The heat shielding for exhaust components, if you ever hear a rattling coming from like the center-ish portion of your car, a lot of times that's heat shields. Stuff like that. The biggest ones, though, are definitely big structural items. That's pretty scary when you have to deal with that. I drove a 99 Jeep Wrangler that the outside of the frame looked absolutely perfect. I was so proud of the fact that I had this really rust-free Jeep, thought it was awesome. And then one day I read on a forum, which I never should have, but I read on a forum to stick a magnet down the inside of the frame, and I did so. And when I pulled it out, I had an entire magnet caked full of red, flaked-off rust, and I found out it was rusting from the inside out. Never would have been able to know. Never would have guessed. And it had gotten to a point where it was rusting pretty bad from the inside out, even though if you looked at it on the outside, it looked nice and all black. It was great.
My dad he still has a truck. He had been through, I think he said 3 mufflers on there because they would rust out. And this is a new model truck, and they would like instantly rust out.
Yeah.
And he couldn't figure out what happened. Well, there was a recall on him. And it turns out that the geometry of the muffler was actually capturing water in vapor form, and then it was depositing into like water deposits. And then that was where the issue was coming from.
Yeah.
So on his 4th one, he drilled drain holes.
Oh.
And then he didn't have a problem. I don't know if he violated
Well, it's funny. Whatever. But it's funny because a lot of times with certain engine components or, the exhaust, they kind of just leave those sort of unprotected, but they rely on not completely, but they'll rely on the heat.
Yeah, to dry it out.
To kind of just bake it off,
yeah.
right? And so that sort of keeps it dry for the most part. Obviously, it's not a perfect system, or else mufflers wouldn't be rusting and falling off on cars and stuff like we see around here occasionally. Yeah. But, that's kind of that. But I think a lot of people will look at a place like we're in, Wisconsin, and usually they equate winter climates with, you have winter climates, i.e. your cars will rust. That's not exactly untrue, but I think that kind of gets blown out of proportion, and a lot of it can just boil down to kind of understanding what's going on with all the water that we have to deal with here, whether it's in frozen form or liquid form. Mm-hmm. And that could be anywhere you go. It could be, most of the time, if you look at cars like from Washington or Oregon, Mark, where you're from, they almost never have any rust whatsoever. And I know that has to do somewhat with their atmosphere. But then you go to other places that are really nice and warm, like Florida, and you have cars that you see driving around that are near the ocean, and they can actually rust out quite a bit because they have to deal with moisture and also the salt content or salt spray that's kind of accelerating the rust process. But, around here, I feel like one of the biggest things you can do, other than some of the physical barriers or protections that you can put on the metal, is just try to keep nasty water from ever sitting anywhere on your car or in and around your car. Like not in any of the door sills. I like to try and keep my door sills, like when you open the door and you get in the car and your boots go over that kind of threshold, if you will, into the vehicle. Sure. And inevitably they drip all over that. And then you shut the door, and then that just seals in all the water or the dirt and all the other crap that you brought in off your boots. That just seals it all in. Sometimes the weather stripping will also sort of grind that dirt into the paint there. And then you've got your protective layer being diminished over time, and you've got water that's just sitting there. And you'll start to see rust in the door sills, on the bottom edges of the doors. You'll see it a lot. Like when you actually open the door and you get under there and you look at it, you'll see rust forming there. Anywhere where there's like welds or pinch seams or stuff like that I guess a lot of what we're talking about is vehicles now.
Yeah.
But anywhere where you see like welds or pinch seams, that's pretty tough to do because they can't always get into if it's welds, those aren't always, perfectly flat, or pinch seams, those can kind of have metal that folds over. You can't get all that protective paint or coating into those areas. They're a little bit more prone to maybe paint cracking over time and flaking off. So that's usually where you'll see it start. And once it starts, that's what rust does on steel, is it starts flaking off. And when rust bubbles, like a lot of times you'll see it if it's happening underneath paint, it'll start to bubble. That's because that iron oxide layer is trying to flake off. And, once it flakes off, it'll take whatever is connected to it with it. And then, the whole thing begins.
Dispel a myth for me. This is another one perpetuated by my father. He may be right. If I park my truck in my garage, which is heated, is that better or worse in the wintertime than leaving it outside?
So, yeah, I was going to bring this one up. This is all like anecdotal, so I actually don't know like if there's a scientific argument to this. But I will say, all right, think about this. You drive around in the winter, snow, slush, ice, whatever gets kicked up on your car, it's just caked all over the bottom of your vehicle, right? When it's in that form, a frozen form, it's not sitting in a puddle. It's on your vehicle, and it is moisture, but it's in a frozen form. As far as I'm aware of, scientifically speaking, if you look at things in nature when they get colder or freeze, processes within that slow.
See the Iceman, for instance.
Right.
Yeah.
Is he very slow?
He's very frozen.
Yeah, or the deer.
Oh, you're talking about the ice? I thought you were talking about like an abominable snowman kind of Iceman. You're talking about like the guy frozen in ice.
Correct,
and then wakes up 2,000 years later.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Kind of like
Encino Man. It was a great movie.
I was going to say, like the deer meat in your freezer, like it's not rotten because it's frozen.
Which is also oxidization. Crazy.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. Yeah, meat rusting. Sometimes I wonder, Mark, if actually when our hands go to complete and utter garbage, I wonder if it's us rusting. Because when I travel to environments where they, in sort of history, if you will, don't have cars that rust very much, I also have less issues with my hands. So I think I'm also rusting less.
Interestingly enough, I would say that is the case. Like you go to like a Washington or Alaska.
Or in Arizona where it's very dry.
Much better.
Much better. So anyway, so I think,
are we machines?
Things that
have
happen.
the machines taken over?
Nanobots.
We might be.
Nanobots.
We're cyborgs, according to Elon Musk.
Nanobots.
Great.
Nanobots. Things slow down in the cold. It's not sitting in a puddle on any of the parts of your vehicle or in any of the crevices of your vehicle. It just remains frozen. I kind of subscribe to the whole theory that when it comes to winter and my car gets frozen and snow on it and all that, I like to keep it frozen.
Okay. Golly, I hate making him right.
Because every time, and think about this too. So this is another thing that I've thought about because I drive a 93 Dodge Ram. Now, some of the places on that particular vehicle that rust, like one of the ones is right on the front of the roof where it meets the windshield. That's a pretty common place where they start to rust. The theory behind that is, well, it could be a number of things going on, but one of the theories behind that is that there is a bit of an air pocket between the exterior roof and what you see when you're inside of the truck. It's not just kind of like one sheet of metal and that's it. I believe that there is kind of a barrier. In fact, there probably has to be because if you're running like clearance lights up top, you don't see the clearance lights poking through into your interior.
You're not referring necessarily to just the headliner alone, but
no, it doesn't have a headliner.
Just metal?
It's just metal.
Okay, so there's like a little transient pocket in there.
Yeah, in theory.
Just like an air gap between the two.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so my thought is there, if that air pocket isn't perfectly sealed, which it would have to rely on probably the seams that are usually made with welds or something like that. If it's not absolutely perfectly 100% vacuum sealed, so to speak, then air will find a way in. And air, when it gets hot and cold, right, it's the beer can effect, right? You grab a can out of a cold cooler on a hot day, and then it starts to sweat. Yep. So I think that if you have some areas within your vehicle, even if your vehicle is not caked in snow, I think if you go from cold to then your really nice heated garage, I think some areas could sweat, which introduces moisture to the equation. Like these are all just thought processes I've had. I'd love to know if
some
somebody
hypotheses.
Yeah. If somebody out there is like a super scientist on, what happens when you pull your cold vehicle into the hot garage, but I think it melts the snow off, and then that pools in areas on the vehicle that are upward facing and maybe have little dishes out. Like that could be spring perches, or it could be, other little areas. Maybe there's an area on top of a differential where there's an electrical connector that water can sit there. Whatever it is. That can happen, and I also wonder if your car and certain surfaces of it actually sort of sweat like a beer can.
Yeah. That gives me so much anxiety, it's not even funny.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Well, like the whole getting into your car and the salt gets in the door frame. I'm like, I have not been paying attention to that.
It's hard to, because it's just you're so miserable when you're in the cold. You just jump in the car and you're like, whatever. The car's a mess. There's like salt all over the floor mats. I just want to go home.
I keep my garage humidity controlled as well.
That's good. If you dehumidify your garage, then you're probably in really good shape.
I hope so.
Because you're removing air from that.
What do you do to
equation?
What do you use for that? Just
a dehumidifier.
Just
or you're removing moisture. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a dehumidifier with a piece of hose you get at the hardware store pumped right out underneath the garage door.
Makes sense.
You'll do yourself a huge amount of favors just dehumidifying your garage.
That's
temp controlled or otherwise.
No matter what you do.
Yeah.
If you do that, you're going to help yourself. I do that in the same room that I have my safe in, my guns in. I have a dehumidifier there.
Yeah.
Especially because that's in a basement. Some basements are notoriously a bit damp around here. But yeah, so that's my whole thought around that thing. But like when it comes to the type of protection that you put on parts or the vehicle or whatever it is, it depends on what the thing is, right? So like we have here an example that our friend Jay did, and he shows, this is a piece of just rusty metal, rusty steel in its bare form. You can see a lot of the pitting and corrosion on it. We didn't necessarily get rid of that as you go down the way here, but he showed the various stages of what he would do. Media blasting to get rid of the rust layer. He says he prefers to use like a softer media instead of a super abrasive media. I think that depends a little bit on the part or what it's going to be used for, but super abrasive stuff will also erode away a lot of the base metal. So he's just trying to get rid of the rust. And then he's got a conversion coat here, which is similar to bluing, or it's similar to the oxidization layer you see on other metals. So this is actually technically bare metal. It's not coated in anything like a powder coat over here on the far side, but it's been conversion coated to have a protective chemical layer against corrosion there.
And he's kind of changed the molecular structure of just the outside of that metal.
Just the outside, right. Now, if you scratch through that and you got back down to the bare metal, then you're going to reintroduce the potential for it to start rusting again. But at least as is, it's definitely protected. This is really useful. So, like, I've done in some builds or things like that of vehicles, like suspensions and rear ends. If you have areas where you're going to be mating together like a control arm to a subframe, and you need to have the tolerances kind of pretty well figured out so that they fit together right. You're not forcing anything. Like if you were to powder coat those areas that kind of slip together and they have to fit together really tight, if you powder coat them, you're going to add too much thickness.
Oh, sure.
That also happens on some guns too. Like there's certain firearms you don't want to powder coat because powder coat adds a fair amount of thickness, and then you're going to be galling up or gumming up the function of it.
Or you see somebody's like, oh, I Cerakoted the bolt, and then all of a sudden those tolerances, right?
I've never known anybody who did that.
Well, I think...
Well, we've had a number of them come through the door.
I'm just kidding. Do you remember when I did that?
Oh, you did that?
Oh.
I did that to a Ruger American. I thought it would be awesome.
I forgot. I was like, oh man, did I speak out of turn? Maybe nobody. I feel like I remember people doing that. It was
you. It was me. It was a 30-06 Ruger American, and I...
So the distinction there is a top coat applicant and then a chemical or surface.
Yeah. So yeah, like with those parts I was talking about, like suspension components, I would have the whole thing powder coated, but we would tape off those faces that needed to be kind of a pretty tight tolerance. We'd tape those off and just conversion coat those.
Yeah.
Because it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's not fully coated, and usually if it's in that area, it's probably gonna have a bushing pushed up against it with a bunch of bushing grease and stuff like that. That's also gonna help keep moisture out. But it's better than nothing. So this is at least a good start. And then with components to a vehicle, if you're taking them off and working on them yourself, you can powder coat. Powder coating is really cool. I very much like powder coating. If you get a good powder coater or applicator, bad powder coat is worse than, in my opinion, it's worse than not coating it at all. I'd rather have a piece of metal that's completely uncoated with anything at all than powder coated poorly. Because poor quality powder coating, it's like a gummy shell that's just waiting to crack and start flaking off. And it's more of a pain in the butt to get that off than it is to get like bad paint off. And bad powder coating is like...
Because if you get that
bugaboo.
off, you're using an abrading process to do it. You're blasting it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's a pain in the butt. But if you get good powder coating done, then it shouldn't flake.
Extremely resilient.
Oh, it's extremely resilient. Yeah. I mean, it shouldn't flake at all. Like a lot of times what you'll see is powder coating that looks beautiful, and then as soon as a rock hits it, it cracks.
Yep.
And then that crack will eventually, water will get in underneath it, stuff will happen, it'll flake off, and then it's like watching, when you go to the beach and you get a little too sunburnt and your skin starts coming off. That's what it's like to see it all happen. But good powder coating, it might get a rocket that hits it, and it won't.
Deflects.
That's it. It's just localized to that area. Doesn't chip, and it's really, really resistant to scratching, chipping, cracking. It's really good stuff.
I mean, I shoot powder coated bullets, and they come packaged just amongst themselves.
Yeah.
Initially, I thought like, oh, they must be like individually separated so that they don't click together or anything. I mean, you can hit them with a hammer, and the bullet squishes, and the coating goes with it.
That's so crazy.
Like to see the coating crack is pretty rare.
Yeah.
Which
Well, I suppose
bullet
they'd
is
have
that?
to.
Acme's. So I shoot them in 44 mag, 4570, 357, 38 special.
Why are they powder coated?
So I don't have to gas check my bullets, and so I don't have leading in my bore.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, they would have to have a really good application process because, I mean, think of the absolute torment a bullet goes through as it goes down the bore of a rifle.
My goodness.
I mean, it's just the obturation.
Yeah.
Shout out to Luke.
Makes great products, but man, did he bring us a good word.
I tell you what.
The inventor of obturation.
But
Jim,
it's cool, though, because like I've dug those out of the berm after I've shot them. And of course, we subject them to tens of thousands of RPMs and 1,900 feet per second and a whole bunch of heat and friction and everything, and then they hit something and stop, and like I pull them out of the berm of sand, and they're still mostly red.
That's crazy.
Unless material's been like removed from
Right.
them and we expose it. But
That's wild.
yeah, it's cool stuff.
Jim, question.
Yeah.
We've got a piece. Well, we got metal in various stages here, but kind of starting off rusty, and then media blasted, removing the rust. What if you had that rust and then you just coated it? Like, let's say you went from the rust to the powder coating. Can you do that, or do you need to remove the rust and go through that in like a step-by-step process?
It's a really bad surface to put any sort of protective layer on, because if you think about what's going on here, this is where you're getting that iron oxide, that rust layer is appearing on this piece of metal, and it doesn't bond to the base metal, right? That's the whole thing about that's why it flakes off and falls off, So if you try applying a protective coat to that, your protective coat might adhere pretty well to this outside rust layer, but that rust layer is not bonded to the base metal, so therefore it's a weak overall application. Your finished product really won't look that good either, because you have all this ugly rust underneath, which is usually not uniform looking, and it's just not a good way to do it. There's certain products you can apply. This gets outside the realm of powder coating. There's certain products you can apply that are like rust conversions. But even those, you want to clean up the metal as much as you possibly can first. It's not designed to just slather over flaky, disgusting, gunky rust, and then it just turns it somehow magically into really structurally sound metal. You want to get rid of the flaky stuff because that stuff needs to adhere really well to a strong base to actually do anything. Most of the time when people use like a rust conversion, they've got the metal down as much as they can, but maybe the metal is fairly pitted, and they've mechanically removed as much rust as possible, but they know that there's the potential that there's little tiny, almost microscopic little pockets of rust in there, and they don't want to kind of risk that, paint over it, and then have issues with that later on in all those little spots. So they'll rust conversion that area. That takes care of anything they may have missed, so to speak, and then they can either leave it like that or do something else over the top of it. That's kind of at least what I've gathered.
Gotcha.
But,
I mean, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense.
But yeah, powder coating powder coating, it just happens to be the thing we had as a visual aid here. It's not that feasible for every application. It's great if you have, like I mentioned, a piece of metal that you've taken off of a vehicle, and before you put it back on, you want to clean it up and prevent it from rusting in the future, like suspension components, cross members, other little brackets and things like that. It works great for. I like it.
That's kind of the time to do it, I'd imagine, too. You got it off.
Yeah.
If you want to do it then.
Yeah. I like it for what I do because I do it on a lot of road cars. I know the off-roading community generally doesn't like powder coating because it's more expensive than paint and it's harder to touch up than paint. So they usually find themselves gashing against rocks, trees, branches, cacti if you're in Arizona, whatever it is. And if you have this nice expensive powder coating that you've done everywhere and then you go out in one trip and it's all gashed up, you sort of, it would have gotten gashed up no matter what you put on it. So you kind of spend a lot of money to have something get beat up anyway. And B, it's harder to touch up with just like a spray can, rattle can. So usually what they'll do is they'll just kind of rattle can stuff, and that gets the job done. It's not as, I think, if you get good powder coating, it's not as tough as good powder coating. But, good powder coating, again, won't save you from having the whole weight of your vehicle, crashing a control arm into a rock or something.
Right.
But, yeah.
Powder coated.
But, I mean,
the
application of powder coat is super cool. I haven't done it, so I can't claim to be a powder coater. But I know that essentially what you have is it's a very similar process to what they do with like electroplating with zinc. But you have basically a metal that's ready to receive powder, and then through charging the product in there or whatever, all of the electronically charged particles of powder basically all. Oh, I don't even know. I'm describing it terribly.
It's like static electric cling.
Right. So it clings to it. So everything gets coated. Like you don't have to rely on perfectly applying everything by hand. You can rely on like physics and basically electronic current to actually coat everything.
And a very even application too.
Right.
Whereas like a liquid surface applicant, you gum it on, and then you're thin on one side.
Or it's thin,
Yeah, one of the coolest things I've seen is when they're powder coating large components that I don't even know what the component was in the video, but they had like an air table.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had air coming up through it, almost like an air hockey table. And two guys took the part and they put it and submerged it basically in the powder that looks like it's boiling. And all it is just air coming up through it. And they get this phenomenal coat. They hang it on the rack and they put it into the oven to cure.
Yeah.
And it comes out and it just looks stellar. And like, I thought about that. I'm like, could you paint that? Well, yes, you could. You'd undoubtedly miss spots. You'd have an extraordinary amount, like a high amount of waste as well, because you're shooting this, small beam of paint out. It was just wild and fascinating to watch. It is interesting, though, that you don't see powder coat applicant used in firearms.
I think it's the thickness. I mean, if you have, let's say,
but I'm talking like for like cosmetic things, right? So like I can understand why you'd use a thinner top coat applicant for different things, non-bearing surfaces. But for like cosmetic stuff, like the accoutrement, like trigger guards, bottom metals, stocks, non-critical parts. Like it's a cool thing. Comes in a lot of different colors. It's attractive.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, so does Cerakote though, and I feel like everybody prefers Cerakote. I don't know if it has to do with the ceramic nature to it. Maybe it's
Cerakote's very tough.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but I mean, this is one example though of a way that you can protect certain parts. Another example would be, in your truck bed, obviously like bed liners of some sort are really good. I like to do. I mean, I know a lot of people will self-apply bed liners and things like that. If you can do a phenomenal prep job, then it's going to be great. But I like to have somebody else apply a bed liner for me. Like, the Line-X ones I think are really good. It's actually stupid to see what a Line-X bed liner can go through before it fails. And even sometimes the plastic ones, I feel like it's amazing to me that the plastic ones don't have more problems with rusting underneath them. Like when you see a drop-in bed liner, that's pretty bad. Like I don't like those. No. And it's just personal preference. I've used many trucks that have them, and I've seen plenty of trucks that had a drop-in bed liner get it pulled out, and it's immaculate underneath. I don't understand how it's possible.
Right.
Because there's so much room underneath there for air and dirt and grime or whatever and moisture to get in. I don't get it. But those can function. I don't like to have a bare truck bed, though, that's for sure. So, I mean, but that's a big one because then you can avoid rust in the bed of your truck. And then one of the ones, though, that I really love, got a bottle of it here on the table. So people...
What is it, Jay?
This is wool wax.
Oh, Jim, right there.
You just have a piece of paper.
Hold that up, please.
Mark printed this.
Don't make me explain myself.
Did you write that, or did you find it somewhere, or is that actually the second page of what you printed out?
No, this is multiple points of research.
Well, what
multiple
happened
points
of
rust research.
There's 2 words technically on that page.
Because it went over.
And a nice, tasteful border.
Yeah, so...
Judgment-free zone.
A lot of times people will try and apply rust-proof protection to the bottom of their vehicle, because a lot of times where you're going to find a lot of bad rust will be on the bottom of a vehicle. I mean, it's exposed to all kinds of things. It's exposed to tons of moisture, tons of debris, maybe every single day, depending on where you live, or at least quite often. And a lot of them I really, really don't like. Most of the underbody rust protection I don't like. Like any kind of rubberized coating I would stay away from. Absolutely.
Really?
I'd stay as far away from it as I possibly could. And I hope that there's nobody who listens to this who's like, well, I'm a professional rubberized, undercoating applicator, and so I hate you now. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't do it because it requires such a... Most of the time what you see with that stuff is it looks beautiful on the outside until it all starts flaking off and falling off. Because what's happening is, unless it's absolutely perfect, like the bottom of the vehicle is perfect and absolutely absent of any moisture whatsoever before applying the rubberized undercoating, then you're just trapping the stuff that makes rust between the rubberized undercoating and the metal.
Yeah.
And then it's just going to do its job. It doesn't care if it's in the light or not. I mean, you can have... How often have you opened up a toolbox to find at the bottom of the toolbox a super rusty wrench that was, got a little bit wet down there one time and it just rusted?
Festered.
Yeah. It doesn't care if there's sunlight or whatever. Yeah. It'll do its job, even if it's covered up by an undercoating.
Jim, I choose to believe that if I can't see it, it's gone.
Well, that's what I thought with that Jeep. But yeah, I don't like that stuff. I just don't. I mean, maybe. I'm not even going to say maybe. I was going to say maybe if it was applied like brand new from the factory before the car ever even saw anything, but it's just hard to say. So
yeah, let's talk about what you do like.
Wool wax. And there's other coatings too. Some people will paint stuff, some people will do whatever. So I was doing some research a couple moons ago, and not many, but a couple. And I saw that there was all these farmers out east in New England. And they had become known for out there, they have a lot of moisture, tons of moisture. They have the ocean not far away. They have winters, they have, a lot of the same stuff we have, but I would even venture to guess it might be a bit worse. What they would do before the winter season, they would take all their old oil, and this is probably like just tragic for the environment, but whatever. This is back in the day. They didn't know. Maybe they still do it. Whatever. They take all their old oil from like tractors.
Oh, hold up, real quick here, Jim. I print off a word here, and it's a pretty big deal. A lot of judgment there. Person wants to coat the earth in oil.
It's already
You do what feels right.
The oil came out of the ground to begin with. It'll just be there someday when they go to drill it later on, right? Isn't that how that works?
Yeah,
The difference is, Mark, is those guys did it once a year. You do it every podcast.
True. And, for all I know, maybe they did it over some big giant drip tank and they saved the runoff for another time. I'm not saying anybody was doing anything wrong here, okay?
We're not accusing.
But what they would do is they take all that old oil and they would just basically pressure wash it up on the bottom of their trucks. So their whole truck would be covered in, some sort of a thick oil that was, rather resistant to water and all that stuff. And they'd drive around then that whole winter and they would remain relatively rust-free. And I got to thinking about that. And I realized that in some ways, a lot of times what people will spray on to vehicles to protect it from rust, they'll spray on something that they want to dry, and they want it to then have like a hardened mechanical resistance to abrasion, and then therefore that protective layer will keep the water out. So they're relying on having a hard layer, and that hard layer, as long as it doesn't become sort of scratched or fail in some way, that will keep the water off the metal. Well, there's all kinds of ways that can fail, even ways that you can't even hardly see. It doesn't have to be this giant, just egregious gash across. It can be really little ways. And then that'll start to rust. And then now you have an annoying kind of like layer of maybe it's bed liner that you sprayed on something other than the bed. Maybe it's paint or whatever that you have to kind of deal with. And maybe you have to sand it all down, start over. And that's just kind of a pain in the butt, especially when you're like underbody. Because there's so many nooks and crannies and all that stuff. It'd be a nightmare to think to have to go in and paint all that or apply some sort of a barrier like I'm talking about. So I looked into that and I was like, well, that's kind of interesting, because what these guys did is they didn't try to paint it all. They just coated it all in a I guess a material or whatever is the proper word that wouldn't dry. So it would actually stay somewhat liquidy. And then the gist was that by never drying, it would almost maintain a little bit of like a viscosity to it. So if ever it was wiped away mechanically or something happened to it, maybe another layer would sort of make its way in. It would almost be self-correcting, sort of. It would also allow itself to drip into other areas that you wouldn't necessarily be able to reach with an applicator. And the other really neat thing was if you got road debris, salt, sand, dirt, whatever, that would kick up underneath the vehicle, that itself would stick to this stuff, and it would almost then it wouldn't get through to the metal, it would stick on the outside, and then it would start to create its own kind of barrier, so then you almost get like double protection, if you will. And so I looked around. I'm like, well, I'm not going to spray a bunch of motor oil up at the bottom of my truck. I don't want to do that. But I found wool wax, and there are other products out there, like the stuff in a silver can with a red top that I can't remember right now off the top of my head. It is...
I thought this stuff would not be this color.
Well, that is a dyed variant.
Okay. What is it in
So
its
this is a
natural
lanolin-based product.
That's
in
what
its
I wanted to
natural
know.
state, it's kind of like a brownish tannish color.
Okay. So do you pick the black so that you can see it better when you're applicating?
Yes.
Okay.
Because the stuff, even if it's like a tannish brownish, when you spray it at the bottom of like a vehicle, it's not going to stay that color.
Sure.
It'll essentially go clear for all intents
It gets
and
real
purposes.
thin, and then you can't really see it.
It gets really thin. You can't really see it. It's hard to tell unless you kind of just look at the sheen to it of being wet, sort of. You can't really tell that it's there. So
you could market it as FDE, and then
then all the tactical boys will want it. What do you got here?
I don't know. Are any of those things the?
Oh yeah, thanks. Fluid film.
Oh yeah.
Fluid film is another. I think it's also lanolin based. Oh, it smells beautiful. I love the smell of fluid
We're
film.
not abdicating huffing
It's
fluid
100%
film.
natural. It's lanolin based.
Okay, fine.
It'd be like it's like walking up to a sheep and just sticking your face in and smelling it. Although it depends on the sheep. Some sheep, no.
Yeah,
Depends on like a clean sheep.
we're not
like
we're not advocating that either.
like the ones that you see in like the children's books. Those kind of sheep.
Oh, yeah,
It'd be
real
like
nice
going
one.
up and just sniffing one of those.
Okay.
Anyway, this stuff smells great. It's not toxic. It is a natural product.
Careful when you open it because it gets on you, and then it gets
you
in
just open it very a little bit.
Very gingerly.
Yeah. So.
I can already. Well, I think maybe I can just smell.
Yeah, just smell that. It's a great smell. It smells like a.
It smells like the car wash.
That's an interesting observation. I wouldn't have picked that. For me, it smells like what I would expect if I walked into my grandpa's workshop.
Yeah, like an old shop.
It smells like an old workshop. Yeah. It's just, I love it. So anyway, there's a good sniff for good measure. So this stuff, you can buy it, and I'm going to be a total wool wax influencer here. I think there's other brands that make a very similar product. But what this stuff does is, it's a lanolin-based product. You can buy it in this dyed texture so that it's black. Then even if your frame is a little bit, like it's got some surface rust on it or whatever, it's a little brown, a little kind of discolored or whatever, when you spray it on, it's just like beautiful, like black color. Everything looks brand new. And so you got to put it in an applicator. I'm lucky enough to have access to a air compressor. So then that's kind of the one you got to have something like that to be able to apply it, because it goes in these little containers like I have here. It's kind of like a plastic container, and then it screws into the bottom of an applicator with a blowgun.
It's pretty viscous stuff.
It's fairly viscous. The colder it gets, obviously, the less viscous it is.
Like the spray, is it like a spray painter kind of
It
system?
looks kind of like a paint applicator, yeah, but a little bit less complex.
Okay.
But yeah, so
do you have to thin it?
If it's cold.
Okay.
If it's cold, you have to warm it. So like you'd heat up like a pot of water and you'd stick this thing down in it to let it thin. But you don't have to thin it with a solution or like a
it has to heat up.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling
as is at room temperature right now with at least my air compressor, which is kind of a hefty one. Like it'll just blow right through the counter.
No kidding.
No problem.
I assumed like this was like concentrate.
I thought that at the end of this was a brush.
There is. Well, this one has a brush.
Yeah,
but paste.
I thought what you were doing, because you told me like you need to put this on your truck, and I'm like, I googled wool wax and I saw it, and I was like,
no, I sprayed it.
Jim, great idea, not happening.
If you got a few free years,
what kind of mess is that for you? Like overspray?
Yeah, so this is nice because unlike the guys who I'm sure had to spray motor oil up on the bottom of their trucks, this stuff sticks.
So it doesn't splatter. You're not getting okay.
No, I mean you'll get a little bit if you're kind of careless with the sprayer nozzle or whatever. You'll get a little overspray somewhere in your shop maybe, but it when you spray it, you aim it. Yeah. And when you spray it, it'll stick exactly where the nozzle is pointing.
I'm feeling like a Spider-Man situation here.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit.
So your prep work, aside from having a clean undercarriage, like that's one, and then 2 dry undercarriage.
Yeah, that's definitely good to start with. But this stuff is kind of hydrophobic. So even if you have a little bit of moisture, it'll be displaced to the outside.
Okay.
So that's like the really neat thing about it. You just go hog wild. Like, I mean, you get, like you said, I like to have a car wash before and wait till the truck's dry. But you just get underneath, crawl underneath there, and just go nuts on it. Wear some safety glasses because some of it, like very lightly, will kind of come back. But, I mean, you can do a whole truck and not have to wipe your glasses.
I thought 100% you were coming out of this operation looking like the Tin Man.
No, once this stuff gets on you, it's on you.
Like,
and it takes orange goop and mechanical removal to get it off.
Sure.
You can't just wash it off.
But you're not walking out of the undercarriage of the old Ram looking like you just crawl out of coal mine.
Like a grease coal mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it does make sense though. Properties that are protecting your truck, it's going to try to do the same for you.
Right.
Well, maybe that's not bad. You're not going to rust like we talked about.
Well, yeah, maybe I just need to walk around with this all over my hands all the time. But I mean, this stuff is brilliant. I absolutely love it. I put it I get underneath the vehicle and I put it everywhere that I can possibly reach with it. It comes with this nice bendy wand on the end of the applicator so you can get it up in various crevices and stuff. I'll put it on every surface that I can see. I won't put it on plastics because I don't think it exactly loves petroleum-based products. It will kind of try to penetrate them a little bit, and then that can cause some like warping or something. I won't put it on electrical connectors. I'll avoid those, and I'll avoid like very sensitive pieces of equipment. So like I'm not going to spray it all up in my U-joints.
Sure.
Like I just don't want to do that because I don't want to get them all just full of a different kind of grease and they're maybe already full of, and then those greases don't like each other. So I'll spray it on basically just big dumb pieces of metal, right? And the whole body of
Are you
of
masking
the truck.
anything off, or you're just kind of?
That's my next question. Yeah.
No, if I get a little overspray on something, I'm not gonna be super upset about it. So I don't mask anything. And I also, it's a 93. I use it as like a work truck.
96.
It's a 96. It's a 90. I use it as kind of like a work truck. So like if I get a little wool wax on the outside, either wipe off or I'm preventing rust, I guess, in that little tiny spot. So I don't really care.
Okay.
But spray it like everywhere. And avoid some of those sensitive areas, like I said. Don't spray like the very backs of your tail lights because then there's connectors there and you might, I don't know, get stuff into those. But like I spray everywhere. I get up inside the rear bumper.
Yep.
I'll get up on top of the axle. I'll try and get down in the spring perches. I won't spray it anywhere near my brakes because I don't want to grease all of my brakes. That kind of reduces friction, which they require. If there's any like holes in the body, I will get in the various holes to try and spray fill those with the wool wax. Somebody's gonna make an innuendo there. It is what it is. So I'll spray it all on that. I'll open the doors, and at least on this vehicle, I know in a lot of modern vehicles, like all the holes in the doors would be plugged by rubber plugs of some sort. But if there's any area in the doors that's not, I'll spray down in the doors. Just because I know a lot of trucks will oftentimes rust out inside the doors.
Yeah.
Not even just trucks, just vehicles in general. Some will rust out inside the doors. And, I mean, everywhere. Way up in the wheel wells. They also make, so Wool Wax also makes another product. This is the rather, like, runny stuff that you can run through an air compressor in the spray wand. They make a stuff that you do apply with a brush that's designed for wheel wells. So it's, like, super, super high stick. It feels like unfiltered honey.
Okay.
Oh.
And you brush that onto the inside of your wheel wells. It has no color to it, but you brush it on the inside of your wheel wells. I did that 2 years ago, and it's all still there in my wheel wells.
Unbelievable.
And what's happened now, though, is all that road debris has caked up onto it. So now there's a new layer of this, like, it's literally like an outside oxidized layer, but it's just road debris on the outside of that grease stuff, and everything underneath it is perfectly fine, just completely untouched. No water's getting to it. No debris getting to it. If I ran my finger along it, I would come out with like a greasy finger still. And same thing, if I touch the bottom of my the frame of my truck right now, if I ran my finger along it, it would come out like greasy and black, like this wool wax stuff.
It's crazy how long it stays there.
It doesn't dry, and that's the key. If you get something that dries, usually there will be a way for moisture to get in behind it. Somehow.
Can we wool wax my truck, Jim?
We can if you want.
I'd love to.
It's a process, but we can do it. So anyway, but this stuff, it just doesn't dry. And it creates, in my opinion, one of the best barriers that you can possibly get. And I'll get that same stuff, the wheel liner stuff. I run that all along the bottom edges of all my doors so I don't get any rust along there. It's all still there. I ran it even on the inside of the door on the frame too. Because the other thing is, like, if you have an old vehicle, the body and the frame and things like that, they're not galvanized metal. Like new vehicles now, you scratch off the paint a little bit. If you see that kind of like bright silver underneath it, that's not steel. That's actually like the galvanized metal. So it's not going to rust there really very likely. Old cars, I mean, it's just straight metal with some paint over the top of it. So you lose the paint and now you have a problem. And so this is, it's not galvanized or anything like that, so I know that I need to protect pretty much everywhere I can.
I've got the definition for galvanizing here, Jim, if you'd like to hear it.
I think I know it, but please enlighten.
Galvanization, or galvanizing, is the process of applying a protective zinc coating to steel or iron to prevent rusting.
Yeah. So your truck is a galvanized body.
Okay.
And so it's steel body, all galvanized, and then they paint over top. So it's very... And then that's why, like, if you go, and I'm going to make somebody else mad at me, but if you go to a dealership and you get a brand new car, and they're like, would you like us to apply the complimentary, or not complimentary because you have to pay for it, would you like us to apply the rust proofing or the rust protection package to your vehicle? That is one of the areas where they usually, like, make their money off of you, more so than the margin on just the vehicle sale. They try and give you all the extras, and then they really kind of, like, recoup a lot of money sort of off of you. If you want it, it depends on the dealership. Some dealerships actually do something that is pretty helpful, and it's fairly good. For the most part, they're doing something that you don't really need because you already have a galvanized body and, all this other stuff.
That reminds me when I bought a different used truck from a dealership a while back, and they told me, like, how great the truck was, and then, they kind of send you to talk to the next person.
Yeah.
And he's like, I mean, you're going to need A, B, C, D. I mean, this could explode at any time.
Oh yeah, the
Yeah.
warranty.
The warranty. And I'm like, but the other guy with
other
how
guy
good
said
of a
it was
truck,
really
it was
reliable.
really good one.
What is the application frequency?
I do it. I really lazily did it before this winter, but last winter, I went and did everything, the whole thing, right? And so that was one big application. It took me a little while. This winter, I crawled underneath there and I took a look around, and I saw if there was anywhere that had been washed away. Incredibly, there had not been. It was washed away nowhere. The only difference between this year and last year was that I added a different rear bumper that I didn't coat. I added in the summer, and so I decided to coat that. I had a little bit of work done because I had an issue with an alignment somewhere, and when it was at the shop, they had to mess around with some of the stuff in the axles, and it got wiped away. So I reapplied there, and then when it was at their shop, they had it on a lift, and the pads that it sat on the lift, when they took them away, kind of pulled away some of the wax. So I reapplied to any of those areas. I reapplied to the U-bolts that hold my rear axle, and I reapplied to the leaf springs a little bit just because they are always moving, so they kind of rubbed a little bit off themselves. And that's all I did. It took me, 30 minutes before this winter, and I'm still rolling on it. No problems.
Annual? Like, will you do the whole process again next year? Is it like you
No.
look
So I
at a
did
trouble spot and hit it if you need be?
Now I just maintain.
Now
I did it once. So yeah, once a whole this winter, and then before the last winter.
Yeah.
And then so before this winter, it was a pretty just maintenance thing. And I have a feeling that before next winter, I won't really have to do anything else either.
So washing your truck then?
Oh, yeah. No, that's the cool thing. So I was like, oh, this stuff's totally going to just get blasted off the second I go through the car wash, especially one of those ones that sprays the underbody of the car. No, it won't come off.
No kidding.
It won't come off.
What about
The slush, the snow, anything, like I'll drive through a cornfield and you got all those corn stalks coming up. They might wipe it a little bit, but like I said, it's like self-correcting.
I like this.
It's amazing. It just doesn't come off.
What about, let's say you're going to be like, oh, man, I'm interested in doing this. How many like bottles to do an average size pickup?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I think I went through probably, I don't even know. I know that I got a big bucket. I can't remember how many gallons it is. And I maybe went through like an eighth of it. What's one of those big buckets like you get food store, like emergency food storage in? How big are those?
Are you talking like the Grandes?
Like I'm talking, like
33 gallon drum.
Is that 33 gallon?
Yeah, it's about this tall.
Yeah.
By about that wide.
Yeah.
33
So
gallon.
I put like a dent in it that was maybe like an
Unbelievable.
So
almost an
realistically, you do like 5 of these bottles.
5 of those, yeah, I'd say. Well, I don't know. Yeah, 5, 6 of those, something like that.
Interesting.
I would assume. Well, no. I would assume like 3 gallon there, 3 to 5 gallons or something like that.
Okay.
To do a whole truck.
Yeah, and you started with nothing.
I started
and
with
went up there and
absolutely
hit
nothing
everything.
on a very rust-prone vehicle.
Yeah.
And I've driven it, like you said, through 2 winters now. I drive it in the summer all the time. I pull stuff with it, and I spray it on all the trailer hitches. I spray it down in the trailer hitch and on anything I'm about to slide into the trailer hitch.
Yep.
I
seized a hitch into my receiver.
Yeah.
This is, my old man's like, you just pull it out. And I'm like, it's not coming out. And he's like a very burly dude. And I'm kind of a slant fella. And he couldn't get it out. A hammer came out. A maul came out. And then we hooked it to a tree and tried pulling the truck forward. Guess what never came out of that truck? That receiver hitch.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jim, let me ask this. Let's say you've got a truck or a vehicle you've been driving a little bit, and you can see like whatever, I guess, on the axles there. Like it kind of looks like what we got here. You've got that surface rust going. Could you just spray that stuff on there, and that's going to help prevent that from getting worse?
This spray right over.
Okay.
So like if you can see it on YouTube, this stuff right here, it's definitely a little bit brown. Like it's definitely a little bit pitted. But this is probably one of those alloys that you're not going to, this could probably sit even outside for years and years, and it's not ever actually going to rust a hole through it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd spray right over the top of this, though.
Okay.
If it were flaking, get the flakes off. First thing.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to
try to get down to the base
Get the
metal.
loose stuff. You want to get to the base metal.
Yeah, as close to the actual clean state as possible, and then hit it.
Yeah.
But
I did this in the, I also, when you pull the tailgate down,
Yeah.
and there's the crevice along the side of the tailgate right there, I applicated it all to that, and it's still there 2 years later.
Unbelievable.
Never been washed away. And it if I still touch it to this day, 2 years later, if I go like this with my finger, it'll come off like a grease.
Yeah.
It
so
hasn't dried.
It's not just to confirm something, it says it stops rust. This is not a conversion. This is a prevention.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, if we look at how corrosion occurs, it's preventing that from happening.
It is.
Not converting already corroded things back to a natural state.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you want to get rid of the flaky corroded stuff first.
And that we can see here in the kind of chronology of this is
Right.
we have a corroded surface, we have an abraded surface, and we've taken away the crap, and then we have a converted surface.
And metal won't rust if there is no moisture getting to it.
Right.
So if you completely coat it with a non-drying, like basically non-removable almost, hydrophobic barrier
Yep.
that adheres to it, and then also is kind of self-correcting, and kind of just like leaches out into areas where, like some got brushed away there. It kind of just does that.
Yep.
Further water can't get to it, so it can't continue to do
Understood.
this.
And that's what they mean by stops rust.
That's what it just stops it, right?
Tracking.
And yeah, salt. There's salt all over the roads here. That salt kicks up. It touches that barrier. It might even get stuck to that barrier, but it isn't getting to the base metal. And then also water isn't getting to the base metal.
Yeah.
So no more problem.
Fascinating.
It's been very satisfying. Now, the tough thing is that if you are absolutely OCD about it like I am, then there's little places here and there that I find that I missed. Even 2 years later, I get up under there and I'm looking around and I'll stick my head in a different crevice within between the axle and the gas tank and all that. And I never coated that. And it's, maybe got a little brown spot. But then I get in there with the applicator and spray that. I mean, you can go absolutely crazy with this stuff and drive yourself insane trying to find every nook and cranny.
I'm envisioning you with various size containers with spray applications from like the little tiny a
little
and like
Banaka.
Yeah, you've got like a little pen sprayer all the way up to something that resembles a fire hose. Just depending on the job.
Yeah, I pictured Jim up in there with like the whiteout size brush.
Right. No, I go pretty crazy with it. I hate rust that much though. And this works for that stuff. I mean, the one thing is like I did take some of that high spray wheel well liner stuff. I brushed that all around the rain gutter around the roof of the truck and on that front section of the roof where there's a lot of rust. Mine was starting to bubble actually even before I went through any winters. It was starting to bubble there, and I hit it with that. So now it's at least stopped that. But the problem is if you obviously use this, you're going to turn on the outside of your vehicle. You're going to turn the vehicle a greasy black. You won't want to touch it. And on that area there, it has discolored the paint a little bit. But it's not a show truck. And also that's an area I don't touch with my hands.
Right.
If I were going to put it on a door handle or anything like that, then every time you go to touch it, you're going to end up with super greasy, disgusting hands. So, as far as like exterior surfaces or surfaces that you have like high traffic or you actually touch, I mean, that's where then you have to start getting into the powder coating, the painting, the zinc, electro plating, anything like that. That's kind of what you have to get into there. You know, was one interesting thing too that I learned. I know we're going a little bit long here, but I wanted to bring. So
it's rust, Jim.
This goes into and I don't even like get it fully yet, but it goes into saline environments, and what was the type of
like a marine environment?
Well, and that's actually maybe not even the right word. There's a certain type of corrosion. I've read about it before. If you use stainless fasteners to adhere aluminum together, you will destroy the aluminum.
Yep. Seen it.
And if you use steel fasteners and aluminum, you will improve the life and rust resistance of the steel fastener.
You can also weld the two together chemically.
Yeah. That too. But that's fascinating.
It's wild.
Aluminum. Sit it there. It'll sit there forever and not rust. I mean, basically, whatever. Put a stainless fastener in it. The whole thing's just going to be ruined.
Yeah. It's like when you put mercury on different types of metals. Like it just turns into carbon.
I forget, what do they call that?
I can't remember what it is, but I remember when I started at the last outfit and we were talking about like the do's and don'ts of aluminum.
Yeah.
And we're talking about like how aluminum ox is formed, and then why you don't take a fastener of grade X, Y, or Z and put it into a raw threaded aluminum hole, because you will either A, end up with pulling out a chunk of aluminum where the threads have adhered to the fastener and the aluminum has completely rotted to hell, or you like cold forge the two together through this interesting chemical oxidation process.
Baffling.
Very curious.
But people do want to watch out for that, because I know some people who will, some people who are maybe even more OCD than I am. Not really, though, because I would consider doing this at times. They will get something from a factory, and then they will take out some of the fasteners and replace them with something that's more rust preventative than the fasteners that it came with. Oftentimes, that's stainless. Now, a lot of things these days are made out of aluminum. And so if you're thinking, these, grade whatever regular steel bolts or screws, these will rust, so I'm going to take these out and replace with stainless steel, you're going to have an issue.
Yeah.
That's why I usually like to go with like zinc coated bolts or things like that, because then I don't know, as far as I'm aware, that there shouldn't be any issue with that. Like a nice yellow plated zinc, depending, or you can get like the silver ones, but then you shouldn't have that issue.
Melanite for me only.
Big melanite guy.
Wow, an aristocrat.
Yeah, I made that up. I don't do that.
QPQ, whatever.
Yeah, I just get whatever fasteners came on it. I'm hoping that the manufacturer thought it was a good thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever upgraded the fasteners on anything that really needed fastener upgrading. I've coated fasteners because they immediately oxidize.
Like electrocoat or like
no, like spray paint.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I
surface or like just surface corrosion, not
I don't usually get stainless fasteners, but a lot of times I will upgrade to like a yellow zinc fastener or a zinc fastener. Because
Is this
hate rust.
The first vehicle podcast?
No, we've done
a couple others.
Well, I learned a lot.
I did as well. Jim, real quick before we go, any other like simple preventative measures a person can do maybe during the winter, to be mindful of the condition of their vehicle?
I mean, as soon as you get warm weather, try and wash your car. Because that will, if you don't have a coating like this on there, that will get off the salt that, is going to, as it's warming up, the snow that was already there, whatever's happening, it's getting moist, and then you have the salt on there, so it's just going to accelerate the process. I actually think most people who experience a great deal of rust in climates like this, the bulk of the rust happens in it happens in late fall, early winter, and it happens in late winter, early spring. I think that's when you get the most rust, because especially late winter, early spring. There's salt that's still kind of on the road. Snow is melting. You're kicking all that salty water up on the bottom of your car. It sits there. It freezes. It melts and it sits there. It freezes. It melts and it sits there. You're going in and out of your garage. Your car is constantly changing between warm and cold. I think that's when we get the bulk of our rust. And I actually don't even know if necessarily, especially for people with uninsulated garages, because I do adhere to that theory, I actually don't even think necessarily you get a whole lot of rust that happens in the winter.
Another follow-up last question. Should somebody be, with as much frequency as they can during the winter months, be maintaining a car wash schedule?
I would say, again, I think it's whenever the weather warms up. I think it's a good idea to get a car wash.
So like if I hit warm enough that I'm not going to screw anything up, meaning if freezing happens of water in my vehicle, like it's not going to break something.
Yeah.
So if it's 28 degrees out, I'll go through the car wash.
When you walk out to your car in the parking lot at the end of the day, because the car has been in the sun, during the day or whatever, and you look at the bottom of your truck and it's dripping, that would seem to be, and also that night it's not going to drop below zero all of a sudden. That would seem to be a good time to get a car wash.
And so keeping and maintaining this cleaning cycle on there, in which I get the same car wash, undercarriage wash, brushless, spray on, doing that with frequency. I'm not going backwards. I'm not introducing. Okay.
I don't think so. I do think it's a good idea to try and get the salt and chemicals off the bottom of your vehicle.
Then that's what I'm shooting for.
That makes sense. That at least sort of resets things.
Yeah.
Especially if you're parking in a warmed garage. So it at least resets things. So it's not like you have water sitting and salt. It's kind of like, well, just regular fresh water sitting there is less harmful.
Yeah.
Now, me, I guess I almost never wash my truck. The truck is too big to fit in most car washes, which is kind of a pain in the butt. But also, I have this stuff on there, and this stuff, all the things that I drive over in the winter, stick to it, and then I just have like that awesome caked up layer of this. And
if you're not watching on YouTube,
this
Jim,
is the wool wax.
This stuff, Jim is once again talking about the wool wax.
It's all over the bottom of my truck, and so therefore I just don't see the need to wash it. And I'll wash it here as we like exit winter. I'll wash it, and I'll look at the bottom of the truck, and it'll still look just like it always has.
Awesome.
And it's not even just like the old Jeep thing where I'm like, it's nice and black in color, so it's perfect. It's like, no, I'll poke around at it. I'll look at everything. I'll see if anything's flaking, and no, it's just.
I like it. Well, there you have it, Vortex Nation. I bet you didn't think we could talk about rust for more than an hour. Jim, you've finally been able to address your arch nemesis, rust, and you've revealed the fact that you are a wool wax influencer.
And a sheep sniffer.
and a habitual sheep sniffer.
That's right.
That's a big problem. Hey, that's a real problem for some people.
Lanolin.
Jim, thank you.
Yeah,
Do you feel vindicated?
I was not paid to do this, by the way. I should point that out. I actually am not.
You're not a real.
I wasn't an influencer until today, and I did it on my own volition. I do feel slightly redeemed, but I'm also still pretty pissed off.
You're still upset.
Yeah.
Well, because of the original podcast?
Yes, the original podcast.
It was a communication breakdown. I was following Mark's lead.
No, I know. It's mostly Mark's fault, but you were still there, so.
As per usual.
If I don't claim to be a rust expert, I just claim to be a sort of an anti-rust enthusiast. So if I said anything gravely wrong, or if there's any scientists out there that would like to refute any of the things that I've said today, please do so in the comments, and I would be happy to listen to you, because I actually have no pride wrapped up in this. If you genuinely know how to prevent rust better than I do, I'm going to listen. But this method works for me. So
awesome.
Wow.
There you have it, everybody. Ryan, thank you. Jim, thank you. Listeners out there, thank you. As Jim said, if you've got tips and tricks to prevent rust, let us know. We want to hear them.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye. There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.